G'day, my name's Mike and I'm sitting on a 4-ton Norfolk pine log which I've just spent a whole year building. And the purpose of this video is to explain why I built it and what I plan to do with it. I want to put myself in the historic predicament of an 1846 shipwreck survivor, James Morrill. Now he wrecked outside the Great Barrier Reef 175 years ago and his ship found itself up on the reef. It started getting bashed apart and James Morrill instigated the building of a raft. Now there was two little yawls or tenders on board this ship, but they were smashed to pieces when they tried to launch them, so there was no other option but to build a raft. So the passengers and crew, over a period of about a day, built a raft as their ship was being smashed to pieces, and they put whatever they could on board, and James Morrill was the ship's carpenter, so he definitely would have put on tools that he would have been able to make something with, including the raft that he was making. Thank you very much to artist Pamela Griffith for allowing me to show her paintings which depict James Morrill's life in great detail. So lots of materials, sails, water barrel, tins, bottles. He wrote a book about it, so I've got an idea of what kind of stuff he had. And so 21 people made it onto this raft and they sailed for 42 days. And they drifted through the Great Barrier Reef. Most of them died after about 6 days. Like one died and then just lots, and they just started falling like flies. They had some fishing gear, they lost the line, and so they were using people's legs that had died as bait for sharks that they were catching with a contraption and a noose that they had with oars. It was pretty epic, crazy, horrendous survival story just for these 21 people to whittle down to 7 that landed ashore just south of Townsville at a place called Cape Cleveland. So of those 7, they fairly quickly came into contact with Aboriginal people who looked after and cared for them, were very generous to these survivors. And back in the day there was all these myths about Aboriginal people and stuff, so they were very scared to begin with, but they soon realised that Aboriginal people were very generous and there to help them. I should clarify here that the purpose of Aboriginal people wasn't to look after white people. They were living their best life, and it steadily got worse after non-Aboriginal people arrived. So it really surprises me how generous Aboriginal people were when the same respect wasn't being shown to them. So of those 7, only one of them survived, and that was James Morrill. The other ones died. They were already in very poor condition after the shipwreck and adjusting to a different way of life. Only he survived. He actually stayed with Aboriginal people for 17 years and then assimilated back into white society when the wave of white people passed through up Queensland, and he then joined back in to white society. But for 17 years he learnt Aboriginal languages, their customs, how to find food, how to hunt. He was a functioning and well-respected member of the tribe. He was particularly good at crafting things, traps and certain things, so he built his niche within their community. He really provides a great example of the sort of richness of Aboriginal society. What I want to do is try and escape his historic predicament 1 year after he'd landed at Cape Cleveland. So by that stage he would have recovered from the shipwreck and he would have learnt ways from Aboriginal people, and which I've been very lucky to learn some knowledge from Aboriginal people. Basically, I'm going to try and escape from his position to the nearest civilization. Now back in his day, he would have known about a rescue haven set up on Cape York by Governor Bligh. So 22 years before he set sail, this depot had been set up in Cape York, and it was in a cave facing north, had a chest full of food and provisions in it, and it was also called the Post Office Cave because every ship that went through that area passed through to look for shipwreck survivors, and many were rescued from there, and also to pick up mail that ships have been leaving for each other and that could get taken back to the real world as everybody else knew it. So the question is, how could he get himself 1,500 kilometres north to Cape York? It's a really remote area. Even back then it was, well, most of Australia, most of Queensland was very remote back then. But this stretch had been sailed through by a few explorers, including Cook, but it was it was completely uninhabited by white people, and it's said that James Morrill was the first white inhabitant of far north Queensland. So my goal is to get myself, using only the materials that Morrill had, building a canoe, which I've done already, and there's a video about that. Look for a link in the description. So I'm going to use this canoe that's been built with those tools and sail it all the way up using the same materials that he had. Now a lot of the stuff that he had was, Western stuff, but he also found or made stuff with Aboriginal people. So he made a possum skin rug with Aboriginal people, and he helped to trap the possums. he would have had spears and stuff. So I've been practicing over the last year with a particular kind of spear and a spear thrower called a woomera, and I'm getting reasonably good at hunting with it. It's a very difficult skill. Aboriginal people are the experts at it, but I'm getting a lot better at it, particularly in the last sort of 6 months or so. He had some fishing gear, and I'll be taking fishing gear as well. So it's going to be a pretty epic expedition. That part of Cape York it's mostly flat, but there are some mountainous areas, some mountains that go up 1,200 meters high. There's areas of rainforest, but most of it is generally fairly flat with mangrove creeks leading inland, and there's often water behind the dunes and stuff that you can find if you know where to look. Now, of course, offshore is the Great Barrier Reef, and that's one of the main attractions that I have to doing this expedition, and why I looked for a survival story to be able to escape from that was in the Great Barrier Reef, because it's just a wonderful place, and there's islands and reefs continuously for 2,300 kilometers, and I'm going to be doing more than half of that on this journey if I make it. So it's shallow waters, you get some quite strong winds and really nasty short seas and high currents. So this thing needs to be pretty capable. I've done my best, but time will tell whether it is capable for those conditions. But I'll be living completely off the land and sea. I will take with me some kinds of food that I can process or collect that he would have, like coconuts, native ginger. I've already found a stash of native ginger that I'm going to help myself to, native honey, a whole bunch of different bush tuckers that I'm going to take with me. I will dry some roo meat as well, because they were hunting kangaroos and he would have had access to that, and drying is a good way to preserve it. You're not allowed to just shoot kangaroos willy-nilly in Australia, and I've just bought kangaroo meat from the supermarket and I'm going to dry it. I'm going to make a separate video showing you these different traditional things that I'll be taking with me, and also another video about the camera equipment that I'm taking with me and how I plan to film this, because this is going to be a YouTube series from go to woe, and also I'll be making a feature film at the end of it and touring around National Roadshow Tour of Australia with the canoe, showing the feature film, and audiences can come and see it and watch the film and get a completely different experience than you would normally get just going to a theatre and watching a movie. I'm filming it entirely myself. I've done this once before, filming the Kimberley. There'll be a link in the description to that as well. And similar theme, surviving from the historic predicament of some German aviators that were downed in a remote part of the outback in Australia. So that's the plan. Aside from my adventuring plan of just having a wonderful experience in an awesome part of Australia, I also have these other filmmaking goals, and it's a very large part of what I'm doing. So that's the purpose of the expedition. Right now I'm just doing the final test run of the canoe before I basically do my big pack up and then head up north to the start point just south of Townsville. So this canoe fits on a trailer. I built it to the length just so it would fit on my existing boat trailer. And so this test, last night I spent a night sleeping on board the canoe, just getting used to stuff. It's the second time I've spent a night on the canoe, so it's getting a little bit more refined, but still lots of work to do. And tonight I'm going to do a shore camp just behind me somewhere, sleep on the beach, because I want to go through the process of loading and unloading all the equipment and anchoring and stuff. Now this is not the Barrier Reef. This is thousands of miles south in New South Wales, which is where I live, which is why I built the canoe here, because I've got a family and they're not going to appreciate me being away for a whole year building the canoe, as well as the 3 or so months of actually filming the expedition. So I'll sleep ashore tonight and then go home tomorrow and just basically finalise the pack up. And really I've got to make a bunch more traditional stores that he would have had, collect a bit more stuff, and then I'll be collecting stuff which I've already recce'd last year in Queensland for this expedition, just where I'm going to pick up certain parts of bush tucker on the way. So when I get there, I'll have a reasonable stash of bush tucker like he would have had with him, stored on the canoe for the journey. So thanks for watching this video. Please subscribe if you want to see more about this expedition and the other expeditions I do as well. This will be an ongoing thing after this trip. I'll be doing more as well. But this is going to be a pretty epic expedition, and I really do hope you enjoy it.